So sometimes the world works out in funny ways. So we have a very serendipitous piece here. I bought a brand new computer last week. My computer totally physically broke. The hinge broke, the screen's hanging out to the side. And when I travel, I have two power supplies. I have one in my briefcase and one for my computer. You know where this is going. I got here with no power supply. I took a trip to Best Buy to try to solve that. As it would happen, new computers, they all have new plugs. They did not have one. In fact, I went to the Geek Squad guys. He opens up a box that has literally 100 of those little tips in it. Not one that fits my computer. So, but then as I walk in the room, I realized that, oh, wait a minute, I thought this was an hour. Now it's 45 minutes. We're starting 5 minutes late. I think this is all going to work out. I got enough battery to kind of get us through the deal. That's why I'm not, so I'm going to turn on now. And I also have a brand new video adapter, but it seems to be working. So that's all good. We're off. Okay. I'm actually surprised there are as many people in the room as there are. After I know it's a pretty technical group, and the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about why I'm here. Because I don't normally speak with this group, this audience. So a little bit about me and my history, just so you know who I am. I spent 20 years in IT for a Fortune 100 financial company. I had a very interesting role there. I went there to be a technician. I wanted to learn, now you can see I'm a lot older than you guys. I wanted to be a technician. I wanted to learn how mainframes work. I became a systems programmer, wrote assembler code, did all that stuff. And through kind of a little quirk, I got promoted to be a manager. I never wanted to be a manager. But I learned pretty quickly I was a better manager than technician. And that's actually still kind of depressing to me today because I really wanted to be technical. And I just wasn't that good at it. But I did manage a ton of technical people. I spent my career there, by and large, moving across the organization every couple of years to fix broken organizations. I became an organizational fixer, which kind of sounds like a mafia job, but and maybe it felt like that sometimes. But I got a tremendous amount of experience in organizational development kind of stuff, which was good. My background is not technology, it's psychology. So all of that kind of came together. I was my company's first enterprise architect. I started their architecture practice. I ran that for 6 years and a whole bunch of other stuff. When I left there, I started my own consulting practice, and for 6 years, fundamentally consulted to CIOs and enterprise architects. I went to Forrester Research to start their business architecture practice, which I did for 4 years. And kind of from there on, I have fundamentally worked with business architects, much less technical architects. Worked for a small consulting company, actually doing this stuff, and now I'm back out on my own. Because I learned the second important thing in my life, I'm a much better manager than I am technician, and I'm much better to work for than almost anybody else I've worked for. So I like working for myself. So what's happened to me over the last 10 years is I've worked primarily with business architects. I run the Business Architects Roundtable. I've been part of the Business Architecture Guild. I'm currently the editor for the Business Architecture Institute. I'm very heavily engaged in the business architecture community. Most of those guys came from technology. They largely were enterprise architects, some of them business analysts, other things, but that's the world I work in. So why am I really here is this. What I've learned from all of this stuff is that the challenge for enterprise architects in particular, and business architects for sure, isn't doing the architecture. I guarantee you everybody in this room is smart enough to create great, absolutely fabulous architecture. That's not the problem. The problem is, how do we motivate our companies to pay attention to us? How do we get people to follow us? How do we take all that great stuff that we know how to do and make it effective? So here's an interesting point. I speak a lot, and I've been slowing down the last year or two, but I've done a lot of talks, Forrester and on my own and all kinds of places. And a question I ask enterprise architects a lot is what's harder? Building the architecture, the models, diagrams, designs, or getting your company to embrace it, endorse it, get behind it. Now you can't get 3 architects in a room and get a definition of architecture. It's impossible. I mean, we're going to have 20 years, you cannot get that. I have asked, and I've counted this, I have asked over 2,000 architects that question, which is harder? And not one says creating the models is the hard part. Not one. So we have agreement on one thing. The interesting part too is when I talk to them about what they do, I just did some research about the needs of business architects for education and professional development. When I talk to them about, so what are you learning how to do? What are you going to conferences for? Modeling, architecture, learning how to do the easy part. So when I got into business architecture, one of the things that I decided to do was to focus on the architect, not the architecture. I can build capability models, I can build strategy maps, I can do all that stuff, and I do it, I don't know, frequently. But really, mostly what I want to do is help architects succeed. And a whole bunch of that, in reality, is not modeling. It's how to deal with people, how to deal with culture, how to deal with organizations. And to me, that's where the real power is, because I guarantee you, if you can do that, the architectural part will come. So anyway, that's kind of why I'm here, and that's the mission that I'm on. I've only got a few more years to work, and that's how I'm going to spend my time. So meet Libby. And let's see, let's set the time. Okay, I'm going to try to get us out of here maybe 45 minutes from here, so we'll be a little over, but I think that's when lunch starts. Libby is my wife's dog. Do you understand that? She is my wife's dog. Libby is not supposed to be on the bed. That's my rule. Now my wife doesn't agree with that rule, and Libby doesn't agree with that rule. But I'll come in tonight when I get back home, and Libby, very likely my wife will be laying in bed reading, drinking a glass of wine, having a good time, and Libby will be right there. And Libby won't jump off the bed. But when I walk in the room, the ears go up. She starts tracking me. Wherever I'm walking, I'll hang up my clothes, I'll open my suitcase, I'll do all this stuff. But I can come up, be done with all that, and come up and snap my fingers, and off the bed she goes. She knows. Because at our house, I am the big dog. Now, that's influence. And that's what we would all really like to have. Kids, in bed, homework done, really great. Boss, I get a raise, I get a promotion. Whatever it is, that's the way we want it to work. I mean, I would love for life to work that way. I haven't experienced much of that yet. I'm still hopeful that I will get there. Libby, I got Libby. But the rest of it's a little bit harder. So the question is, why don't we have it? Why don't we have more influence than we do? Organizational placement, I get that message all the time from architects, business architects in particular, because they think they ought to report to the CEO, then they're probably reporting to the CTO, or maybe the enterprise architecture manager, or wherever they are. Lack of sponsorship, there's nobody in the organization that's really promoting what I do. I've kind of got to do it on my own. I don't have nearly enough authority to take all my grand ideas and get people to do stuff. Organization doesn't like to collaborate, I don't know. You could list another dozen or two. But the fundamental reason that if you don't have the influence you want, go look in the mirror, because it's your fault. You want to be influential? You can be influential. And it's all a matter of putting your mind to that in the same way you put your mind into building an architectural diagram. No different. It's all the same stuff. You just have to work at it and you have to be intentional. You guys are pretty young. Does anybody know who that character is? Oh, I love it. A bunch of young guys. That is Pogo. Pogo was a comic strip character in the late 60s and 70s. And I know it's a little hard to tell here, but he's a possum. He lived in the Okefenokee swamps, and he was a philosopher, and his most famous line of all the years he was there, and many of you do know this, we have met the enemy, and he is us. And so when it comes to influence, this could not be truer. And again, I want to reiterate, I lived through this. I started off as a technical guy, individual contributor, always wanted people to listen to me and follow. I'm a smart guy. Aren't you a smart guy? You look like a smart guy. I think you're a smart guy. Why are people following over? And I think part of it is we want change to happen our way. We want to control versus influence, so we confuse power and influence. We're going to talk about that. We ignore what I call the me factor, and we're going to talk about that too, because everybody has one. We don't empathize very much with our change targets, because we want people to do things and we just don't care how much it hurts. Totally ignore culture and context. This is an amazing one, by the way. Forrester did a research piece, and they asked failed business architecture efforts, what was your number one problem? You know what the number one problem was? Culture and politics. Number one. And yet, when I talk to business architects about that problem, not my problem. CEO's got to solve that problem. Somebody else has got to solve that problem. Culture's screwed up, but not my problem. Somebody's got to fix that. And then when it does, all my stuff will work. Don't work that way. And we want it to be easy for us. We want the world to be easy. So let me give you a hint. This stuff's hard, get over it. And in fact, I think that's, I had it easy. Here's the other thing. One of the things that I discovered with architects, and I live there too, believe me, is we spend a lot of time on what should be. We have a lot of ideas about the way it should work, about the way the organization ought to line up, the way we ought to collaborate, the way we ought to share technology, the way we ought to do things the way we should. So there's kind of the way the world is, there's the way we think it should be, and then there's this little bit of stuff we think about that, well, what can really happen here? And what I want to encourage people to do is change that model a little bit. Quit thinking so much about what should be, and think a lot more about what can I make happen? What can I do? What can I drive in the organization? And I certainly can have a vision out here about the way I want it to be, but should is a really bad word. I tell my architect should not be part of your vocabulary, because it has no bearing on whether anything's going to work or not. It's what you can make happen. We're going to come back to this. How many of you have read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Oh, good. I got a literate group here. That's really good. One of the things that Covey talks about, which I like a lot, is this idea about circle of influence and circle of concern. What we have is a whole bunch of stuff that we care about. I care about world hunger. I care about nuclear disarmament. I care about refugees. I care about a whole bunch of stuff. You know, I care about whether my grass grows. I mean, I got a lot of stuff I care about. But I only have a small amount of stuff I can really influence. And Covey's comment, which is so logical, it's kind of a tautology because it's right there, is if you focus on what you can influence, you'll make a difference. And when people see you making a difference, what happens? Your influence grows. Now your sphere of influence is bigger, and if you focus there, you can make a difference, and it will grow again, and it will grow again, and it will grow again. And when you start thinking about that, one of the other keys is, where do you have the biggest opportunity to make a difference? Right here, with you. And once you can get, we'll look at Covey's 7 Habits in a second, but once you get yourself oriented to change in the way you need to change to influence the organization to be a leader, Then you can start thinking about maybe the people that work for you or your peers. Then you can start working up to your manager and influence them, and you can kind of go on until you have some influence on them. But the whole key is start where it works. What influence do you have? And all of you have influence. And in fact, I would tell you most of you have much more influence than you think you have. It's a matter of figuring out where that is and applying it. So, I have these 12 rules that I've done. I didn't read these in a book. I didn't learn these in a class. These are all things I came up with over my 20 years or so of managing people, trying to get organizations to follow their architecture, trying to help other organizations to get people to follow and go there. Some of them are a little more meaningful than others, but I want to share those 12 rules of influence with you and give you some context. The first one is, this is hard. It's hard. And it's not just hard to do, it's actually painful. I'll get that header right here. We'll see if I do. So I just want you to try this. Just play along. Why don't you cross your arms? Just go ahead and cross them. Just kind of sit there. Feels okay. Now, I just want you to reverse them. Yeah, I can see you guys back there having trouble. Okay. That doesn't feel the same. And I will guarantee you that it's already happened. I saw it. If I ask you to sit here like this for very long, assuming I wasn't totally boring, you would get absorbed in what I'm saying, and you would just do this. I already saw 3 people do it already. You'll do it because this is uncomfortable. Now, you want to try an experiment to check this out? Here's what you do. When you go home tonight, whenever you go home, I want you to do this. Get ready for bed, but get in the other side of the bed. If you have a significant other or a dog, whatever, don't change anything. Don't change this. Don't change the books or the lights. Just get in the other side of the bed. Don't say a word. I will guarantee you an interesting discussion tonight.
My wife actually already kicked me out to the other side. I wanted to try it and I hated it.
And you hate it. It doesn't feel good. It does not feel good to do that. You want to really have some fun? Do what I did. Came home and said, honey, I decided to quit my job for 20 years and be an independent consultant. Ouch. She thought that was pretty painful. It is hard. And so, think of this model here for a second, because this is kind of a traditional change model. We're up here in the status quo of the current reality, and things are predictable. That's the big thing. We're predictable. Might not like them, but they're predictable. Mostly people are content. And some big change comes in, and the very first thing that happens is we go into denial. That'll never work. You idiots don't know what you're doing. We did that last year, and it didn't work. This guy, it can't work. It just can't work. I don't understand what you're doing. I'm going to go back up here where things feel good, calm, rational. And if you keep pushing, they'll jump back in here, and maybe come back up here. You keep pushing a little more, they'll come in here. Finally, we'll get over into chaos, where there's a lot of anxiety and fear. And people are saying things, they're fearful for their jobs. They don't know what's going on. They don't know what's happening. They don't know what they need to go do. Oh, wait a minute, you said this, but you also said that won't work. We can't do this and that. Oh my God, this is terrible, terrible. Everything's gonna go to hell. Oh, I'm gonna go back here. It'll never happen. You guys don't know what you're doing. Boy, it feels good. And so how change works is we keep going around and going around and going around until, if we push long enough, we get up here to the new reality where there's renewal and empowerment. And all these guys that were saying, you're crazy, it won't work, and all that, they're like, that wasn't so bad. Actually feels pretty good. Here's the key. If you are the change agent, where do you spend your time? And where you spend your time mostly is right here. You don't get to go back up here and feel good for a while. And you got to be right here to keep pushing forward, pushing forward, pushing forward, pushing forward. That's a hard place to do. But that's what it means if you want to change the organization, if you want to change the way things work, if you want to change your role, the organization, if the power you have, you've got to keep pushing through that denial, that chaos, and all that stuff. So it's not only hard for the people you're trying to change, it's hard for you, because you really have to work at it. Second rule is, it's always about people. I know you've heard that all the time. People say, oh, it's all about people, all about people. Is your organization, does it really believe that? Does it really, really believe that? How many of you are in an organization that sometime in the past 10 years has had a layoff? Does your organization believe people are the most important thing? No. They're fungible assets and we can move them around. They don't. So we talk about it all the time. But at the end of the day, you do not change companies. You do not really change organizations. You change people. You influence people. And so while you can create models to help you influence more broadly, at the end of the day, it's about people. You're not going to do it through models. You're not going to do it through process. You're not going to do it through any of that stuff. It's going to be through people. So I don't know how many of you remember, but back in the 90s, we had this big thing called process reengineering. Michael Hammer and Jim Champy. Great stuff. I know Jim Champy, really smart guy, a lot of good stuff. I mean, the world was just filled with this stuff. Our Business Review was writing it up. And it died. And it died because we could create a great process. We could get organizations, we could get people to follow them. Because they looked at it and said, that's not the way I did it. I think I do better than that. I think I know better than that. And people resisted that process. And even what the thought process was, we'll build these great processes, we'll tap into the smartest people in the company to do it, so everybody else will look at it like, oh yeah, this is great. And they didn't. And we weren't prepared for that. If we'd been prepared, we could have made that work. It's always about people. And every person has a me factor. So I told you my background was in psychology. And what I know is we all have a series of things that we believe. And we believe them pretty strongly because our life has lined up a certain way. And maybe they're true, maybe they're not true, maybe they were true yesterday and they're not true today, I don't know. But we have beliefs about the way the world works. What is culture? Culture is simply people's belief about how the company really works regardless of what it says. So when you get in a company and say, oh, we you look around and you see what works, and you say, well, that's what works. I'm going to do that. And that's what culture really is. People are invested in positions. They've learned something, they know something, they have a relationship with somebody, whatever it is, that they're invested. So you go into a programming group that, I don't know, maybe they're, I'm out of date on my programming, maybe they're all Java developers, and you pick the guy that's like, I am my Java expert. Guess what? We're going to go to Python. They had jobs. All of a sudden, you went from expert to novice. You have a big investment not to go there. Big investment not to go there. And, you know, people don't like to take risks. Believe it or not, some people in your organizations actually have personal agendas. Is that not amazing? Sure. I know. I just can't believe it. I can't believe it myself. It happens. People in general don't like change. I mean, just in general, why do you sleep on the same side of the bed every night? It's the same bed. You don't like change. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way we are. Compensation, you heard a discussion about compensation earlier. Compensation is a huge driver the higher up the organization you go, the bigger driver it is. And dysfunctional compensation systems are rampant. They're a little bit better today than they were, but I remember when I was in technology, the guy over development built this compensation system that was all about reducing the number of errors in code. I was in the technical support side. We didn't have that in our compensation model. Thank you. So what do you think happened? Programmer comes and says, yeah, no, I screwed that up, but why don't you take the blame for it because it won't hurt your compensation. What are you talking about? So they create crazy things and career paths. So everybody has a B factor, and if you're going to influence them, you have to understand some stuff about that B factor so you can connect. So you're not banging it against what's driving them. You're trying to help them turn what's driving them into something positive. And rule number 3 is you do too. You have a B factor. You have a set of beliefs. You have a set of strongly held positions on things. You don't like to change. Whatever your incentive system is, you have one that's driving you in a certain direction. And I'm sure none of you have a personal agenda, so we'll just take that one off for you. But you also play in this world. And guess what? You better know what yours is. I did a lot of leadership development when I was in my corporate job, which was really good for me. Here's the interesting thing. I had all this technical training, and what happens when you go to get technical training? They sit you down and say, "Oh, let me show you how this works, how this works." It's like a process, a formula, a set of steps, a set of best practices. That's what it is. So I go start into the leadership process, and I think, okay, they're going to tell me what to do. I manage all these people. Now they're going to tell me how to lead. I'm going to do A, C. No, you know what all that was about? It was group therapy. What they are trying to do is get us to see ourselves, to understand ourselves, and how we related to people and how people related to us. And it really was like group therapy because, I saw executives laying on the floor crying. It was an amazing experience. But the whole thing was to get to us, to get us to see who we were, what our agendas were, what our blind sides were, what our power needs were, and all of that stuff. Because you can't truly lead until you can see all that. And you can't influence until you start having an inkling of what's driving you here. Why do you do what you do? So there's a lot of confusion about power and stuff. I want to talk about that in a minute, and I even go back and forth on it a little bit. But I kind of came up with this model I call a power pyramid, and I came up with all these P ideas. It really works, don't you think? P, G, P, I don't know, I like it. At the top of the thing is positional power. And we think of those guys at the top as being very powerful, very influential. So your CEO, all those kind of guys, okay? So it's mainly is created by the role you play, and it's focused on authority and control. It's hard to get. Why is it hard to get? Because you don't get positional power without putting in your dues. You have to rise up to some level in the organization, have some positional power that has any size. And it's easy to lose, and all you have to do is look at the newspaper and see how many CEOs get fired. Happens all the time. We may see Wells Fargo CEO get fired here yet. So hard to get, very easy to lose. There's political power, which you all know about, which is really about who you know, who you're connected to, and it's almost based on favors. And it's really easy to get because I could go wash your car. Just go wash it. Do something for you. Bring you coffee. And all of a sudden, the laws of psychology say you owe me something. And you know it, and I know it. And I can do that, and if I do that a little bit for you, all of a sudden you're going to feel like you want to do something for me, and I can influence you that way. But it's also easy to lose, because and if you don't believe that, watch Congress. Because what do? They all get together over here around some bill, and yeah, it's all good. And then all of a sudden we're on something else, and somebody's over here fighting these guys. It comes and it goes. So it's pretty lightweight. Personal power comes from how others see you, and it's largely focused on the values you have and the values you display. It's really hard to get, and unfortunately, it's easy to lose. Here's why it's hard to get. The way you get this is fundamentally you act consistently. You say, I'm going to do something, and you do it. You say, I believe this, and you demonstrate it. And you do that over a long period of time, and pretty soon people say, I can trust that Jeff Scott guy. So when he says do something, I think it'll be a good idea. What's happened? I've influenced them. Here's the problem. The first time I screw that up, I don't go back one step, I go back to 0. And I have to start all over again. So it may take me a year to build up to something worthwhile. One little screw up, and it's all gone. Persuasion and persuasive power is really the activities that you do that I call influencing. And it's based largely on deep relationships. Now, not deep like you have with your wife, but deep professional relationships. Remember I said it's all about people? When it's getting to understand people, know what drives them, know what their needs are, know what they care about, all that kind of stuff. It's hard to get, because you have to put in a lot of energy to build relationships. You can't, I have some relationship with every one of you in the room right now, but I'm willing to bet by Monday I won't. Unless we talk again, and again, and again. It takes a while to build this stuff up. Here's the key though, once you have that, it's really hard to lose. Parents love their kids, even if they're ex-murderers. That doesn't go away. Your best friends won't quit on you. Your siblings, by and large, won't either. Those are deep relationships. So the point here is, when you start thinking about influence, you have all of these things going on. You have some positional authority, no matter where you are, you have some positional authority. You're an expert in something, you have some authority. You have some political power because you interact with other people. You certainly have some personal way that you work, and hopefully you're doing some influencing. The key, and why I put the influence on the bottom, is that's really where the base of the pyramid is. If you can do that, the rest of that stuff will follow. And one of the issues about power, which I've kind of already alluded to, is we misinterpret this. What we think is power gives us influence. So what we go after is power. So a quick story about me is I had this organization that I loved. We were doing all this cool stuff. I had enterprise architects, I had technology researchers, I had guys doing strategy, man, it was cool. So that was like having a target on your back that says, fire me first, fire me first, fire me first. So we were going, well, you guys got layoffs, we had layoffs. I kept getting my stuff reduced and reduced and reduced because I wasn't critical. Also all that nice to have stuff. And what I finally came to realize was I was being controlled by my budget. And if I could figure out a way to work where I didn't need a budget, nobody could control me. And for the next 3 years, that's what I did. And it worked really well. Because it wasn't about having the power in the traditional sense, big budgets, high up in the organization. It was about having influence. And I learned that was the critical point for me where I learned, oh, here's how I can influence the organization. So what do you think is control gives you power? The reality is it's influence that gives you power. Once you're influential, people will start listening to you. And the other interesting part here is some of this, back to you looking in the mirror and figuring out knowing who you are, is when you think you are powerful, when you feel powerful, guess what? You are. I spent a lot of my early career not understanding how powerful I was. And it took 2 or 3 times for people to kind of make comments to me like that were like, oh, what? Me? No, I don't know what you're talking about. Then finally it hit me. And when others think you're powerful, you are. So and that's what happened to me, was I started figuring out that other people think I'm powerful, that I'm influential. I'm like, I don't feel that way. But I started noticing other people did. And what I realized at that point was, wow, I am. And at the end of the day, power is about getting what you want. It doesn't matter how you get it. If you're getting what you want, you are pretty doggone powerful. So rule 5, and I'm going to speed up. You can't avoid politics. I hear all kinds of guys tell me, I don't play on politics stuff, don't do it. You cannot avoid it. You are in it, whether you want to be in it or not. How you play is what matters. So what you have to do is acknowledge that you're there, know that you're part of it, and back to that company stuff, start at growing your sphere of influence. Back to that me factor, know who you are, know what your principles are. so that when you're confronted in a political situation, you know how you want to behave. You don't have to react to it. So be clear about what you'll do and won't do. Deal with people face to face. I'm a real email guy. I'm probably showing my age because now I don't think anybody communicates with email. It certainly doesn't seem that way to me anymore. But email and all of that electronic stuff is one of the worst things in the world about dealing with people in a political situation. Because people take words out of context. And worse, you send me a zinger and man, in 2 seconds I'll zing you right back. But if I have to come down the hall and talk to you and look at you in the face, probably not going to zing you. That remoteness, that's why there's so much road rage. It's easy to be mad and flip off and blow their horn and do all that stuff at people you don't know and you're gone. You can't do that if you're going to see them the next day. So take a larger, longer view and be open and receptive. So part of this whole thing about playing politics right is being pretty open to what people are saying and doing. You don't have to believe it, you don't have to follow it, but just listen to it. And be open to the fact that, well, maybe some things are right that I don't believe. And increase your tolerance for ambiguity. Think about what's going on in politics today. Our political system is not working very well. Why is that? Because we've got poles, liberal and conservative. It is all spread out, and nobody's in the middle. We can't get anything done. The way you play the political game to your advantage is you get in the middle, and you draw people in the middle, because that's where things will happen. That's where you can compromise, and that's where you can do stuff. And to do that, you've got to get more ambiguous about it. When you're off on the end, you can believe this is black and white, and I believe it. When you get in the middle, all of a sudden, it's a lot of gray, and you have to be willing and able to tolerate that grayness so you can work with these guys who are on the end. Being very open and clear, no hiding, because one of the ways politics works is I come over here and whisper in his ear, you can't trust those guys in the back, you can't trust them. And he'll tell him, and he'll tell him, and all of a sudden something's going on. When people do that, you know, when people came and whispered to me, like, oh, you can't trust John, I'd be like, what? You can't trust John? Everybody hears this. You gotta be open and out there. And the biggest thing here is to keep your outcomes right in front of your face all the time. And I think this is so hard for us because we get into short-term things. I had to coach my wife a lot about her 15-year-old daughter who was about to drive her nuts, and there are some women in here, if you've got teenage daughters, you know what I'm talking about. But they were just, and the coaching I gave her was, you've got to think about the long term here. How much she hates you right now is not important. It's how much she loves you in 5 years. That's what's important. And to do that, you've got to keep your goals right here and do the right thing. And in the long run, that actually worked out pretty well. But you do have to do that, and a lot of times it's hard because at that moment, the way you feel is, I just want to cut your head off. Because you're pissing me off. And what I need to know is, tomorrow, I'm going to need something from you. I got to be sane and at least polite. I don't have to agree, but I can't yell and scream and do all that. Number 6, has anybody in here read the book Start With Why? Ah, all right, 2 people, good. And 3. You are literate, guys. Usually I do this thing and nobody's read anything, and I get to talk about how illiterate through this. Can't do that with you. There's also a fabulous, for those of you who don't want to read the book I thought was mediocre. The idea was great. The talk on TED was amazing. And what Simon came up with is this thing he calls the golden circle, which is what, how, why. And what he noticed was this. The way companies talk about themselves, the way organizations talk about themselves, even social organizations or charity organizations, religious organizations, doesn't matter. What everybody talks about is what they do. And they start moving inward, and then they'll talk a little bit about how they do it. And then maybe they'll have a little sense of about why. What he also realized was really successful individuals, companies, organizations started with why. They based the way they operated and what they did on why. And here's the thing. So why is not outcome. The outcome here, which I really need to expand the circle, is out here. So you guys are architects, technicians, whatever, and the question is, why do you think that's the right way, the right approach for you to work in an organization? Why is that? So I talk to business architects all the time, and they're like, oh, business architecture saves the world, we'll get the companies moving quickly, we'll save a bunch of money, and everybody will be on the same strategy, and we'll all love each other and all that other stuff. And I'm like, why? Why do you believe that? Because there's a whole bunch of other ways to do it. So we want to save money. I mean, we talk about, oh, we want to do a lot of analysis to reduce the proliferation of technology and all stuff. We're going to save money. I'm like, well, just shoot the corporate jet. You'll save money, and it's one whack, and you're done. We have a belief about why we do what we do. When I consult and help design business architecture practices, I use this model to get them to talk about it. Here's the interesting thing: not one in 10 architects can tell me why they do what they do. They can tell me why it's good for the company. They can talk about that all day. They cannot tell me why they do it. What is the core motivation for doing it? And it is hard to figure out. Because sometimes why you do what you do might not be something you'd want to share. Back to me and who I am. So this is a really interesting thing. I really encourage you to go look at the video. The first 10 minutes of that got really bad audio, they have a bad mic, but it's still good. And Simon Sinek is an amazing presenter to do this. But here's, I'm going to skip the example here, because I'm going to get to the end. So anyway, this is a good thing to watch, but the key is, why do you do what you do? Not the outcomes you're after, why do you do it? Influence is 90% persistence. This is what it's all about, guys. I told you earlier, it's hard, you gotta work at it, you can't get it overnight, you gotta go with it. I like to tell some of these stories. I'll tell them one about Jay Leno. Jay Leno, if you don't know, is a big car buff. He has a big car collection. He's got a bunch of money, so he can have all these fancy cars. So when he was a kid, he was interested in cars. He goes down to the Cadillac dealership, which is the fanciest car dealership in town at that point for him. And he goes in to get a summer job, you know, after school's out. And he goes, talks to the manager, and he says, I'd like to work here, blah, blah. The manager says, we're not hiring, we don't have a job. And he says, okay, thank you. Monday morning, bright and early, Leno shows up, goes around to the car wash, and there's a guy back there, you know, who's got guys washing cars. He says, hey, I'm the new guy. And he starts washing cars. And he washes cars all week. And the owner of the dealership happened to be walking by Friday afternoon and looks at the car wash guy and says, what's he doing here? He says, oh, he's the new guy. He's great. Bingo, I got a job. And if you look at J.K. Rowling, has probably the most successful book in history outside of the Bible, maybe. I mean, huge numbers, multi-billionaire. She got rejected at least a dozen times on her first book. A dozen times. Can you imagine if you were the guy that said, no, this will never go? Do you know how she actually got her first book published? The publisher took the book home, gave it to his daughter when she was 11, and she read it and told him he absolutely had to do it, had to do it, had to do it. Do you know what the first run of the first Harry Potter book was? 500 books. 500. The guy's advice to her was, don't quit your day job. And look where she went. Persistence, persistence, persistence. This really pays off. Don't manipulate. I think when we want to influence people, we are like ready. I want this. I want it to happen, and I'm ready to manipulate and lie and do whatever I do. And I think a big key here, if you want to be influential, not past this one event, you can't manipulate, because people pick up on that really quickly. They may not catch it till it's done, but they do pick up on it. So you got to know what your motivation is. I mean, what am I doing here? Why am I doing it? Actually knowing what you're trying to accomplish. Be honest, be open. I like to say be right. In other words, really think through what you're asking asking for? Is this really the right answer, or is it just what I want? We can still be wrong. It's not about pressure, definitely not about emotion. And if you have power, back to the power pyramid, if you have some authority, if you have some political chips you can call in or all that stuff, don't use it. Interesting thing is we all think that the CEO has a lot of power in the organization. They're at the top, they command, they do all this stuff. The reality is CEOs have a lot of influence. And one thing to think about is, at one point, they were the new guy. How did they get to be that guy? Nobody gave it to them. How they got to be that guy was when they were down here, as an individual contributor doing something, they started influencing people. And people noticed. And when they can get a bunch of people to do stuff, somebody said, well, we need to give them more people so they can influence more people. And you'd be amazed at how little power most CEOs believe they have. Because at the end of the day, it really is influence. I have some great stories about that, but again, I'm going to skip those. And I think the thing to do is think win-win, which is really comes out of the Stephen Covey stuff. If you can come up with strategies to change people's direction, that's a win for them and a win for you, you're starting to build that long-term relationship. So if what I do is come negotiate with you all the time and it's a win-lose thing and we're both arguing and yelling and doing all that stuff, you will never want to engage with me. You might have to, but you don't want to. But if I come to you and I work through our differences and get to the place where you win and I win, you will always be open for me to come back. Because it's like, hey, that worked for me. I'll talk to you. And so I always thought my goal was independence. I didn't want anybody to tell me what to do. I wanted to do it on my own. And I thought, man, that's influence. And I think the Covey stuff helped me understand it's really about interdependence. Think about win-win, seeking to understand. You can see all this stuff starts replicating around. That at the end of the day, again, it's about building those relationships. I've done hundreds of presentations over the last 10 years. I've built thousands of slides, probably. I think this is the money slide for me. I like to use this in every presentation. I don't always do it because this was a hard-earned thing for me. And I think it's so powerful for people to understand. Our whole organization is set up to work like this. Nobody wants you to be an average programmer. Nobody wants you to be an average architect. Nobody wants you to be an average analyst, leader, any of that stuff. They push you up to the top. They'll train you. They'll coach you. They'll give you the right projects. They'll put you on the right teams. They'll do all this stuff so that you get better and better and better. And so when we start moving into leadership and influencing and innovation and all that stuff, we think it works the same. It does not. What happens is, once we start trying to be really influential in our organizations, do things a little bit differently in our organizations, a whole bunch of cultural norms, rules, egos, all that stuff start pushing us. It pushes us up from the bottom because nobody wants you to fail. But it also starts pushing you down from the top. Because all of a sudden, you're kind of, you're talking about stuff above your pay grade, buddy. You got no business doing this. And so what happens is, we get this pressure to come back down. What does that mean for you? That means that if you're not doing very good in your company, whatever you're doing, you're at a high risk for failure. Getting fired. If you really become highly influential and push to influence, your risk level is very high. You want to be safe? Stay here. Because up there, it's not safe. Great story. Some number of years ago, there was a state government that had the same problem almost all state governments have. How do we please our constituents? Our constituents are complaining about the services, how long it takes to get stuff done, rudeness, all this stuff. And one of the governor's staff said, well, you know, we have these 3 agencies that are really doing phenomenal. They're getting accolades and we're getting all this stuff. So So why don't we get a crew in here, go interview them, and make a documentary? So we'll film it, we'll make a documentary, and we'll show it to every person in state government, and with the message, this is how we want you to behave. Pretty smart, huh? So they hired a crew, they got the whole thing up and running. 2 weeks, they killed the project. Why? Because those 3 agency heads were all breaking the law. Now, they weren't stealing money. What they were doing, because remember, rules in government are laws. What they were doing was saying, I can't follow that law to the letter and still serve the people correctly, so I'm going to kind of ignore that. And inside your company, what you will find is the people who really influence, they break the rules. They do it a lot. And sometimes it pisses you off and you don't like it. Sometimes you're like, go baby, go! But the point is, when you start breaking those rules, your personal risk goes up. And that's what happens. So, you just gotta know that, you gotta be aware of that, be willing to accept that if you really want to become seriously influential. Because it's not about where you sit, it's about how much influence you can drive throughout the organization. The thing you need to learn is you can't influence everybody. I learned this the hard way, and I created what I call Jeff's 20-60-20 rule of management, and here's how it works. 20% of the people in your organization will go with you. They will follow you. You can influence them if you just stand up and go somewhere. Just pick a direction, go, be verbal about it. 20% of the organization will go with you. Why? Because they just want somebody to lead. They want to know the plan, and they'll sign up for whatever the plan is if it's clear. You go, they'll go. 60% of the organization has to be sold. They have to be given some data. They have to understand how it connects with their meat factor. They got to understand the benefits for them and why it's good for the company and all that stuff. But you can sell them. You just got to work at it. The last 20% would rather go straight to hell than go with you. Why? Because you are too young to know what you're talking about. You are too old to know what you're talking about. You're a woman. Women don't understand this. You're a man. Men don't understand this. You ain't got any hair. I mean, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. They're not going with you. They're not ever going with you. Forget it. So, what this tells you is this. What happens is, particularly, and a lot of this in my architectural world, we focus on that 20% because they're the loud, vocal, rock-throwing, yeah, you guys are crazy, nobody this, blah, 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 blah. They're never going, and we spend a lot of time trying to convince them to go with the belief that if we get them to go, everybody else will kind of go on. And what happens is we work with them for a while and we get so worn out, we go back to the 20% that love us because it feels so good. And we ignore the 60% in the middle we can influence. Back to that sphere of concern and sphere of influence. So forget the 20% at the bottom, they're never going. And I actually proved that factor out because I had a pretty big organization. I was doing some very creative things. We were struggling with a bunch of people that wouldn't sign up. And I basically sat them all down. We got rid of 25% of our organization this way. Was, here's what you're doing, here's what I need you to do, and here are your options. I'll coach you, train you, educate you, do all the stuff you need so you can do what we need. I'll help you find another job in the company. I'll help you find a job outside the company, or I'll fire you. A, B, C, D. Pick whichever one you want, let me know tomorrow. Interesting, nobody chose D. It was the one nobody chose. But almost nobody chose A. Once it was clear to them that I understood what they were doing, and they weren't doing what I wanted to do, and they had to do it, they're like, I don't want to be here. Until then, they would stay for the next 10 years if I hadn't done that. And so we got them different jobs. In the company, outside the company where it was, we got rid of about 25, 30 people that way over a couple of years. And every year we would go through the list of, are they on board or are they not on board? If they're not on board, they're out. And you wouldn't believe what that does to the morale of an organization. You get rid of those guys, man, you fly. But the point is, you can't influence everybody. Don't waste your time on the guys that aren't going. Figure it out, go. Just a quick one here. One of the things that really generates influence is make commitments and keep them. There was some talk this morning from Angela about differences between business people and IT guys, and here's the fundamental difference. When we get projects, when we get stuff thrown at us, what we say is, well, if we get enough money, we get enough time, we get enough resources, we can do it. When a business executive gets thrown their target for the year, it's, yes sir, I will do it. And they don't know how they're going to do it. They have no control over the competition. They have no control over the financial world. They have no control over the weather. They have no control over anything, and yet they commit up front without knowing how any of that's going to play out to goals. And their compensation is tightly tied to those goals. Now that can create a bunch of dysfunctional behavior, but the point to all that is, make commitments and keep them is a way to demonstrate to people that you're trustworthy, that you mean what you say. The other thing I like to talk about is we all have heard walk the talk. Talk about what you're going to do, and then better do what you're talking about. And we tell executives that all the time. I think the flip of that's more true. You should talk the walk. Do something first. Show people I actually did it, and then talk about it. This rule, the last rule, really came from home for me. I learned this in dealing with my kid. I have a combined family, so there's all kinds of conflict with kids. Here's what happens when we're working with people and we have conflict. I'll do my half, you do your half. We all have done that. I'll meet you in the middle, blah, blah, all that. And here is what happens in reality. As we get closer and closer and closer to meeting those obligations, I start noticing he's slacking off a little bit. He's not really getting to the middle. He's not really doing his fair share. I'm going to take a step back. And what happens over here? Oh wait, he just took a step back. I'm going to take a step back. And the next thing you know, you got a gap. And you don't solve the problem. Because everybody was going to do their half. You want to make it work? What do? Wait, come on. You sign up for 60%. And be upfront. I'm not going to meet you in the middle. I'm going to do part of yours. And most of the time, in the best case, what that does is spurs other people to step up. Because they're like, wait a minute, I'm going to do my half. You don't have to step in for me. I'll do it. And what you get is you really meet in the middle. You get a nice overlap with the solution. Worst case, they do their half, you do the 60%, and it still works. You cannot go wrong here. So, this really works really well in conflict situations. But again, it's all up here. And is it fair that they're not doing their half? No, it's not fair. But it's right. Because you get what you want. Okay, quick thing here about just kind of a model in general. This whole thing about influence is first listening and understanding. So I think in Covey's language, that's seek first, understand. Be open and clear. You create trust by sharing your agenda and what you're trying to do. Demonstrate value by supporting other people's agenda. People will sign up to do a lot of stuff for you if you help them first. I mean, a lot. And at the end of the day, what you're trying to get to is this synergy where everybody's on the same page. So you're trying to figure out how do I take the things I want to do and integrate them with the things you want to do and make it work for both. So, end of the day here, influence is about getting what you want. Maybe not the way you want to get it, because you'd like to use a hammer, and you're only going to do it most of the time. And I don't know whether we ever decided whether we're handing these things out or not. You can send me an email, I'll send you the deck. Here's a bunch of books you can read that are all really good books around influence. If you want to contact me and get this presentation or talk about any of this stuff, tjeffscott@gmail.com. And we started late and we ended late, but I think it's time for lunch. So I appreciate you being here, your attention. Thanks so much.